actually been put in boxes, and the objective with society is to actually create systems in place as if we are a machine. And the machine really needs to work really well. It's a machine that's been conceived through the intellect. And it turns out through some pretty cool discoveries in the last few years that we are, in fact, complex living systems. So complex living systems, we're all interconnected. We can change constantly. We can actually learn to use our imagination to be able to go and change appropriately. And it's my observation that this is what we're referring to as the big pivot, like an on-wing pivot. And there is going to be all kinds of emotion that are going to come up during this wonderful opportunity to shift. We're calling the pandemic crisis, and we've said it before, is we as a species only evolve at the speed of crisis. We've needed to evolve from where we are right now, in my opinion, for quite some years. I've been expecting this to happen 25, 30 years ago. So the fact that it's actually happening now on a global scale, for me, I find some comfort in that, because what it's doing, although it's actually painful and challenging for everybody in some capacity, we are now forced to move from our intellect and try to figure out something that is, very difficult to figure out from the head. We're learning to trust from the heart, and then learn to stream from the heart. And anybody who's actually done any work with meditation, mindfulness, energy management, if you sit quietly in meditation for, doesn't take but a minute or two, you start to realize it's pretty busy. And possibly, if you actually think about it, it's busy because our intellect is trying to make sense of it, as opposed to recognizing that we're streaming an energy signature and an information signature that's constantly streaming through us. And the benefit of meditation and mindfulness is to start to get in touch with the fact that we are basically live streaming information plus energy all around us in the form of sensations, images, feelings, and thoughts. Yeah. And the thoughts we thought were our thoughts are not necessarily our thoughts. Off to you, Sarah, on that particular segue on oopsing.
Right. Oopsing, owning other people's streams or shit or whatever. And that's, just as you were saying that, I wanted to bring up that we have created the Big Pivot, which we just launched officially today. The Big Pivot is a 6-part series where we go deeper dive into this concept of, what we've foreseen and riffing about this in stream, in flow for a year. And we joke about, coming from a broadcast background, usually if you were going to create a documentary or a series, you'd storyboard it out and you'd create a storyboard. And in the honor of flow and just what we're about, we couldn't really do that. So we just, set the intention for, this is the sort of the message. This is what we're about at the core of who we are. And let's just see what streams. And so I'm really happy and excited about this Big Pivot. We had the big game, the big play, and now we have the Big Pivot. And this is just the streaming language that we are getting as a reflection of what's happening in the market. And this speaks to what our market telling is all about, is first just listening to the market, and then how can we be of service to the market. And you and I coming together has been all about this, how, seeing the changes that needed to occur in the global scale, and also in individuals, in terms of, taking that time to meditate and still our minds so that we can be more comfortable living in the heart space and existing in this unknown landscape that is life. And the concept of we are not our thoughts is also the concept of not taking ownership, like not hoarding or not trying to control or grasp or hold on to energy, which is always moving in and out of form. It's this concept of nothing truly is ours, to hold and to control and to own. And that I think is a big pivot mindset as well. And, had a long time ago, someone that I met along my travels just say, when we come into this world, we come in, with our fists tight, but when we leave, our hands are just open, and we leave only with the memories and the experiences. We don't leave with our belongings or our thoughts or anything. And so, not taking ownership that these are my thoughts and therefore my thoughts control who I am and what I'm about. That just came up for me in what you were talking about there. Over to you, Tim.
I love the idea, and it's hard to actually get a segue because there's been a delay in the audio at times. So
I know this has been a more of a challenging conversation to have, because I can't see your face properly or your reactions because there is this delay occurring.
Yeah.
Like, are you still there?
So we're learning to adapt, and we're learning to pivot.
Yes, we are.
So it's again, unknown unknowns. The interesting thing, and again, having done performance improvement consulting for a long time, it is very obvious to me that we never were in control of anything. We were not in control of our sensations, the images we experienced, the feelings, and the thoughts. We stream, and so we're not even in control of the stream. And we're in the day I used to call it, we're just a big we're a tower for a radio station. Now we have internet towers right down the road. I've got internet towers. So the idea we stream within a bandwidth vibrational frequency. The vibrational frequency that's the lower vibrational frequency tends to be the intellect. The vibrational frequency that's the higher frequency tends to be the heart. And in fact, once you actually get really, really good streaming the heart, there is no bandwidth limitations. It's infinite. And once you actually get to that infinite stage, your thoughts create your reality. But that visual frame of reference just provided is really important to actually understand that that's how we all evolve. And as a species, we are now evolving from this understanding that we're all separate and duality rules the day, and it's control and top down. That's how we were educated, most importantly, to learn how to use the intellect. IQ, intellectual quotient, was deemed to be the most important indicator of someone who's actually going to be successful. And then along came the idea, trying to think of the guy's names, can't right now, Dan Goleman on emotional intelligence. So he was talking about EQ. And I think that the idea of a Q, if anything, if it is, it's about imaginary Q. So we're back to IQ and the combination of intellect and heart, but it's an integration of the two. That's the thing that actually, from my perspective, dictates sustained success for individuals. Learning how this organism, this body, this head, the heart, the gut, the feet, how this all works. And there's mechanics associated with learning to work this machine. I always think it's hilarious, but it seems to be me, but I keep on pitching this notion that we should have been given an owner's manual and a guide, a mechanic's guide as to how this vehicle called the body, head, and the mind actually works. And in school, we were taught that, okay, this is how it works. It's all about the head, and you got to memorize body parts, but most of the activities taking place there. The interesting thing when we introduced the idea that our world's 100% subjective, you have to use your imagination even just to follow that, because there is no precedent using the intellect to be able to go and understand what you're talking about is 100% subjective. Well, my sense of my inner world is 100% unique to me. Sarah, you don't have an understanding of my inner world. Now, you might think you have an understanding of my inner world because you have an extrapolation of what the other person. And I think I understand you, the other person, but I don't. I don't know who, like, I can't say, oh, I know what Sarah's going to do. This next section, she's going to actually go and she's going to drink coffee. Now, see, I don't really know Sarah. She's not drinking. There we go. She's going to drink some coffee.
No, actually, I'm going to have a piece
and
of.
We have, yes, you're going to have a piece of that nice little toasted bun thing. And so we've been taught the frame of reference that we need to use is outside in. And that's an intellectual frame of reference. Now, to move from intellect to imagination, we need imagination to actually start to understand that the world, my world, your world, everybody's world takes place 100% inside them. We make sense making sense of sensations, feelings, and thoughts to try and actually go and perform in a certain way. That all happens inside. There's nothing that I experience that isn't happening and emanating from inside me. Even when the door slams out there, I experience it in here as a door slamming, when in fact, it could be a car door slamming, or it could be someone yelling, or it could be my dog jumping at the door. I experience it all inside. And I have to start to get really, really tight with my imagination if I hope to actually navigate successfully, even just around my house. And now we're in this big pivot. If in fact anyone gets stuck in the head in the fear response, and they get stuck in the back of the head here in the amygdala, the most primitive part of our brain, you get stuck in that part of your intellect, you have three choices: fight, flight, freeze. And that becomes a real challenge. So the idea is to get out of your head. And we tell people in consulting to imagine a butler coming in. He's got a tray. Give the butler usually his name Jeeves. And he comes in and says, Jeeves, let me give you my head. So you cut your head off and you use your imagination. Don't do this at home.
Don't
cut your head off.
Your head.
Yeah, the Three Stooges are funny, but don't be like them.
You like them. So yes.
You come in, cut your head off, and then leave and make a decision from what you've got remaining, which is your gut and your heart. And I'm telling you, in my experience, the decision that you make and the choice you make tends to be actually much, much better.
Yeah.
There, I was looking for a segue. And off to you.
Well, someone just commented there was no sound at the beginning. And I think there's sound now, but I hope there's sound. In any event, I've recorded this, so we will repost the Zoom recording, which will likely have audio, I'm hoping. This is technology. And there was another thing you mentioned about there needing to be some sort of guide or playbook or manual about this whole inside world reality that we didn't really get much taught about in the education system. And we have a big pivot playbook that is going to be coming out. So if you would like to be one of the first to grab this, then give us your email and we will happily send this as a flow responders guide to sustained wealth and well-being. I didn't know where to take the segue up from that other than, yeah, the power of the imagination. And we talked a lot about Dr. Joe Dispenza, because he always talks exactly about the same thing, that something that occurs in your imagination, your physiology of your body, it actually doesn't know the difference. If it actually happens, if you're actually watching, and a lot of science studies have, putting yourself in front of a screen and just experiencing a movie, what that actually does to the physiology of your body. Thus the importance of just being so mindful about what we're consuming and taking that balance, especially of, how much time are we spending watching mainstream news and media, and then how much time are we taking to really be with ourselves and be with our own imagination, and really understanding the power that we have. As I like to say, we are all broadcasters of our reality from the inside out. And as you mentioned, Tim, if we're in that fear response, and this is the big pivot, what we're pivoting out of, this understanding that we can live here on this planet without fear, or at least reframing fear as this opportunity to stretch and grow into something else, as opposed to being, being a victim to the typical amygdala hijack response, which is to fight, flight, or freeze, as you said. And in those states, like you mentioned, it's really hard to make flow choices, obviously, because it's the counter. And the power of having a practice of your internal energy, it gives you this empowered place that you can trust that you'll always be in the right place at the right time. You'll always be provided for. You know, you're opening yourself up to the synchronicity that is life, that is this complex living system, as a human, as a relationship, as connection to the earth. And we're in this grace period to see how we are going to be navigating as a collective. And Bruce Lipton talks about this jump point in evolution that we're in, the spontaneous opportunity, using the power of our internal reality and focusing on love. And I went out for a walk last night, and there was a woman singing from her balcony opera, like the most beautiful voice and just expression. And she had everyone out on the balconies. Everyone was out just watching her, and you could literally feel the love emanating, not just from the singer, but from all of the appreciative audience members. Just it was so inspiring, the energy all around. It made me really feel like we're gonna be all right. Like if everyone steps into that place of love and doing what they love and expressing themselves from that place, what if we're stepping into actually a really magical new landscape for our future?
I'm gonna add a segue that, because I think, so I'm just reminded, I was on a phone call with my brother, who is a mayor in Ontario. And so, as you can imagine, he's got lots of stuff going on, and there's lots of initiatives. And he, like me, and not surprising, is really excited about where we are as a species, because this is the pivot. This is the opportunity for us to actually pivot from fear to flow. And he was telling me about Canada in particular. This is a phenomenon that happened in the UK, but it's actually been picked up in Canada, called caremongering. And he was inviting me to actually Google it or Facebook it or something. And I in talking to him, the way he explained it was, and he's already done that for his constituents. He's put together people and businesses. So a delivery with pharmacy, with food banks, with gas station, frozen food, grocery, and fresh food. And so he created basically a spider's web. And the spider's web is what we call this bridge that we're here, this intergenerational bridge that Flow Network is all about creating, using imagination rather than intellect. There's no historic precedent for that. But what we're talking about, as soon as we have a response to a crisis, we have a chance to actually go into fear or to flow. A fear response is to contract and hoard. A flow response is to actually be more caring, to extend yourself to your ecosystem, to be able to go and help people get, in this case, food, and then drugs and whatever else is needed. And you can stay in the safety of your home, and the drivers are driving like crazy to be able to go and satisfy this. And this is happening all around the world, but apparently in Canada this is really picked up, which then leads me to the ideal. We're saying the big pivot, really, from a business standpoint, we're pivoting from what is shareholder wealth or capitalism to something called stakeholder wealth and capitalism. And wealth in that particular context is stakeholder well-being and wealth. And that's where we are. That's like, we're now totally committed to that. It's likely that the infrastructure that supported the top-down shareholder wealth will still continue in some ragged way. But I'm reminded that Mr. Trump, who was stumped because his country is not hooked. They're not networked in the medical system. They're not networked centrally like we are in Canada or other countries are. So they've had a hard time tracking and trending the spread of COVID. So his messages to the people in the United States has been, up until recently, not so much about the concern for well-being, but making sure the concern for wealth and the economy maintains its trajectory, because they just announced a $2 trillion budget to be able to go and support this COVID pandemic. And so he would have to be talking to the constituents within the financial system that is very much a top-down, power over, hoarding, shareholder economy, to say, no, we're going to get you on big, but we got to get $2 trillion together. We're basically going to print that. It's going to be sovereign debt, I think. We're going to print that and get that out to people because we have to get that out. And that then switches the focus from shareholder wealth to stakeholder wealth. And so it's taken them a little bit longer than most other countries, whereas Canada was really quick off the mark on that and continues to be quick because we're more stakeholder centric. We're more heart centric rather than head centric. We've got a global reputation in Canada for being very heart centric. And Sarah and I, we also believe that this is something that's emanating from, where we're living here just in Toronto. And in Toronto, there is a really big heart. All coming back to my main point of this notion of caremongering, it is evidence. It's just not an ethereal thought or idea or imagination. It's something that's levering the internal network effect to recognize we are all connected. How can I put an external network in place that will satisfy the internal network needs? Mm-hmm. So this is one of the first practical examples I've seen that I can actually give voice to of what we're talking with Flow Network, which is being able to go and help people start to use their imagination and lever the internal network effect, which was first made famous by the Maharishi, and is, if you want to Google the concept, it's called Maharishi effect. It's about being able to raise consciousness through the internal connection, and the most obvious way to do that is to care, to trust, to love, to support. Get out on your balcony singing. Help somebody actually go and deliver groceries, or help set up a caremongering ecosystem.
Even just
these are the things that are actually,
even just a smile, just
yeah,
spread that because as we're talking about this, I'm just thinking, what's occurred, I think, is just a result of so many people on the planet globally making that shift we talked about in the Big Pivot video, and I think we mentioned it in 2012, this prediction of the Mayan calendar ending and things changing. And so right. I think that really marked a point in history where there was a raising of consciousness and a lot of people waking up to the power of their internal reality and connecting to the earth and connecting to this understanding of the Maharishi effect, and people like Greg Braden and Joe Dispenza and Bruce Lipton and all of these leaders that have been planting the seeds of these new ways of being. And what if all of that work that has been done by, some people use the term light workers, really the ones who have been focusing on this idea of we are all just light at the core of who we are, which is, when we had met your previous business being light core and just resonating so deeply with the core of business is people, and the core of people is light. And what if, that work that we have done is now we're seeing the result of it. And this is what I'm, and speaking to a lot of other heart-centered leaders and creatives, this crisis is now what's calling people to rise into their power and into these, I just love hearing that your brother doing the caremongering. That's just so brilliant, because in a time of pandemic, it's really can be a fear. Fear is so infectious, and so when we can just even see a smile of a stranger walking by, it just reminds us that we are so good in our hearts as humans, and we have such resourcefulness. And to really, Samina, I just want to say hi. I saw your comment. She says, it's an opportunity to focus on what we want more than we ever have before. Fear or focus, choose. And that is it. It's stepping out of that victimhood of, I don't have any power over my life, to that place of empowerment that it's as simple as choosing the flow response over the fear response, love over fear. So I love that. We're already at 20 minutes, Tim Glover. We were going to do it 20 minutes.
Right.
Tim's got his first public speaking that's in the online the online space in this new world we're in. So you got to get off to that.
Yes, I do have to get off to that in a couple minutes. And it actually is very interesting because I'm aware, even for us in doing this, and we've done this now for a while, the flow show, how it changes, how much it changes just the dynamic.
Yeah.
And I'm really appreciative that we've been doing this a long enough time that I'm actually feeling pretty comfortable and just going on a Zoom conference relative to the tech world to help. I'll just share my perspective on what I feel is actually happening in the world, and see if we can actually shine a little light where there's possibly a little bit more darkness than not. And the opportunity to actually talk again about imagination. We are, as a species, really very different than every other species, if you will, because we have this capacity to be able to go and love and then self-reflect and then be conscious of our consciousness, which takes a lot of imagination, because you can't really get your head around that. And science has already proven that from an pure academic intellectual standpoint, they still haven't figured out how to actually even just talk about this, because it's so outside the box of the intellect. So to be able to wrap today's flow show up is imagine the world you would love to experience and go about experience it on a day-to-day basis. Because the art of even just closing our eyes and all of a sudden the imagination can take us to places that are more powerful than anything we would be able to experience, especially at this point in time, because there's just so much fear. And because we're streaming, and we're always streaming, if you're living out in the country, as like I got a space out in the country here, you don't feel the fear nearly as much. But if you're in a city center where people are packed up, and I'm going to get off this call and actually phone a friend who actually is stuck in one of the towers downtown, just in self-isolation, and he's going out of his mind. He's just going like it's like this little cubby hole. And the challenge being that we've got to use our imagination to be able to go and move beyond the fear. This is a really, really important point in history, to move from what we're calling fear to flow and love. So on that particular note, unless you have something else to add, Sarah.
To flow or fit in, that is the question.
That is the question.
Well, thank you for joining us. Apologies for the first, I think, 10 minutes of this. The audio apparently wasn't working. I hope it's working now, but I will upload the recording, which should have the full audio. And we'll see you next week at 12:12 for another flow show. And
do check out the Big Pivot we have a 6-part Big Pivot on YouTube.
Yes, we do. I'm going to flash it up here again. Check it out. YouTube, Flow Network, The Big Pivot, and you will see our 6-part series. We'd love to hear your comments and your insight on that as well. All right, Flow and out.